Okay, guys, so here's the $1 sign that we have. Now, Ian refurbished it already. I believe he went over the yellow. He's going to fix this up. I'm sorry for the white balancing on the camera. It kind of looks like there's a lot of yellow in here. But, so Ian's going to fix this as soon as I'm done. But he went over the names here with yellow, so I'm going over it here. This I just inked in with a Sharpie. So I'm going to put their names in here, and then as soon as I'm done that, I'm going to give it back to him. He's going to gloss over it, and then we're going to put this back up. And I'm thinking of putting EST 1993 right over here. We haven't had that before, so I'm contemplating that. But I'm going to start putting in the names. I got paint right over there. So yeah, that's where we are right now. That's where we are with the $1 sign. Sorry if the camera's a little shaky. I don't have the tripod with me. I've only got a couple of minutes. So a lot of problems have come up in the past couple of weeks. I'm going to show you guys what went on. Okay, so we had a couple of audio issues. For those of you that have been here the past 2 weeks, you might have picked up on the fact that the audio sounded horrible or we couldn't play it at all. Well, here's what happened, and I'll show you guys backstage. So we've had some audio issues back here because apparently you guys were saying on YouTube in the comments that, hey AB, for some reason whenever I put $1 in, the show just cuts out in the middle of a song. And I wasn't sure what you guys were talking about. See, I thought it was the air compressor because sometimes 15 minutes before we close, when we're shutting a few lights off, sometimes we will turn off the air compressor 15 minutes before we close, because not all the time are the man and dog singing within the last 15 minutes. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. And even if you do shut the air compressor off, it takes a good half an hour at least before they stop moving. But the comments, you know, some of the people were telling me, they were like, oh, no, it like the whole thing just cuts out in the middle of the song. Like, they don't slow down, it just turns off, everything turns off. And I'm like, what? Well, on Monday, June 28th, I came up here. I don't know if it was a Monday, but it was in that week. It was the week before 4th of July. I came up here one morning to do some work, and they all were frozen in a way. When I looked at that, it looked like a blackout had happened. Like, it didn't look like an air compressor issue, it looked like an electrical issue. So I saw it, like Tony's torso was turned this way, eyes wide open. Hank was turned this way, eyes wide open, mouth open. Rocky was facing that way, eyes wide open. And I'm like, wait a second. But here's the thing though, Rocky's mouth was closed. His eyes were open, but his mouth was closed. And my first thought was, well, if it was an air compressor issue, that would mean his mouth would be open, because with the air compressor turned off, no air would be getting into the mouth. The mouth would just drop, but it was up. And yet the air compressor was turned off. So I went, okay, something's wrong here. Something is wrong here. So I went downstairs and turned on the air compressor, and when I did, nobody moved back into their original spots like you see right now. Everybody was still frozen still, and I'm like, okay, something's wrong here. I gotta see what's going on. So I went in here, and I just unplugged everything, and when I did, everybody all of a sudden moved, like immediately, to their positions that you see right now. So that was my first clue where I said, okay, it's an electrical issue. Something's wrong here. So I'm going to show you guys what happened. This is what's been going on the last 2 weeks. Now, first of all, I should tell you, we have everything already straightened out. It's all been straightened out. But I'm going to show you, I found out the problem of why that's been happening. Okay, here we are. Here we are. Now, the way the show runs is we have that yellow extension cord down there. It's kind of dirty. That yellow extension cord, everything is plugged into that yellow extension cord. That yellow extension cord we plug in back here, and that turns on that power strip, and everything is plugged into that power strip. The dollar box, the audio, the speaker, the power supply, the ribbon cables, everything. Everything's plugged into that power strip. Everything. So if we unplug that yellow extension cord, it shuts everything off, except the air compressor. The air compressor is controlled by another switch downstairs, not up here. The air compressor actually used to be in the tunnel back in the 90s. It used to be in there for the longest time, but then we decided to move it about 10, 12 years ago, something like that. But that's for another time. But anyway, So everything was plugged into the power strip, but it wasn't plugged into this power strip. That power strip right there is a replacement. This is what they were plugged into. This power strip right here. Now, I don't know how long this thing has been here. I don't know. I don't know if this has been here since the beginning. I highly doubt it, because see this rust up here? This is pretty rusty. Here it isn't. So I was wondering, like, what's wrong with this? Well, here's the thing. If you take the, if you follow the plug, it comes all the way up here. Look at this plug. Look at how, here, I'll show you. Let me get it. Look at how corroded that plug is. So the whole show was plugged into that. Now you know why the show kept shorting out every time. Look at how, just look at it. Look at that. That's not only a fire hazard, that's so dangerous right there, man. But that's how bad it was. So I said, okay, we got to get a new power strip. So I got this one from home and just plugged everything into that. So that solved the problem of everything shutting off in the middle of the song. So that solved that problem. And by the way, ever since I hooked this power strip in, no problems whatsoever. So that solved that problem. But here's what happened. Once I fixed that, it turns out the amp that we use to plug the speakers into, this thing, completely shot. Which stinks, because this thing we just hooked in last year when we were doing Bringing Back the 90s Part 2. But it was used. It wasn't a new one. And I asked the guy that was helping me, because we were changing that from the old amp we were using to a new one, and I said, is this the original amp that we used in the 90s? Because originally, we were using this one. And then last year we were having issues with the cotton barrels and the speakers, and then we switched it to this. And then this one isn't working. But I asked the guy that was helping me, I said, and by the way, the guy who was helping me has worked at Wonderland for the last 30 years. In fact, he was one of the guys that installed the Man and Dog back in the 90s. He's one of the last guys left. And I asked him, I said, is this the original one that we've been using? And he goes, oh, no. No, we've gone through like 3 or 4 of these over the years. Because that's what happens, you know, eventually stuff breaks down, you gotta replace it, you gotta fix it. So, I literally took this thing home, this amp, and this speaker over here, because we've been using this speaker. By the way, the Cotton Barrel speakers, we haven't been using them for over a year, because not only are those speakers shot, the wires are so rotted and old, and the jacks where you plug the wires into are so rotted and old, because these Cotton Barrels are the originals. They're the originals. These were here in the 90s, you guys. So I don't want to get rid of these Cotton Barrels. So we're just using them as decoration. We're not using them as a speaker. These are the speakers that we're using, that we've been using since 2020. We've been using them. So basically, we had to get the amp fixed. And I took the amp and the speaker home with me. And I thought, well, how do we keep the show running? Well, I took my giant guitar amplifier from home, I put it right over here, and I plugged the show into that. And I gotta tell you, the audio, some of the worst audio you've ever heard. It sounded so bad. It sounded like, it almost kind of sounded, it's very hot under these lights, by the way. It kind of sounded like, you know how like, the Man and Dog sound like this? It sounds like this, very muffled. It almost sounds distorted in a way. That's what it sounded like. Because I had to send it out into the out jack in the amplifier. Because if you do it in, because if you put it through the input, it would sound so loud. It would sound like you were at how do I put this? Like a Slipknot concert. Okay, that loud, that distorted. You don't want that. So the audio had to sound really, really bad for a couple of days. It was either the audio was going to sound really, really bad, or we were just going to turn the show off completely for a couple of days until we were going to get this thing fixed. And we did both. You know, the amplifier wasn't working sometimes, and when it wasn't working, we had to unplug the show because we didn't want people putting in dollars and not hearing the music. Because if you put the money in, the characters would move, but you wouldn't hear anything because the amplifier wasn't working all the time, my amplifier, because the audio sounded so bad, we didn't want people to get ripped off. So on certain days when I was here, I would be working on my guitar amplifier trying to get the best sound possible. But when I wasn't here, which was most of the days, we would just have it unplugged. And I kept getting calls from the managers, and they were telling me, they were like, when are you going to fix this? When are you going to fix this? And I'm like, I'm working on it now. And this went on for like the last week and a half, you guys. Almost 2 weeks this went on. So I took the amp home. I literally took this amp apart. I took it apart. I unscrewed this, took the knobs off, tried to fix it. It didn't work. I didn't get anywhere. I literally tried to hook this up to a CD player, tried to get music out of it, out of the speaker, testing it at home. Nothing worked. So I had to buy a new amp, and that's this thing. I bought this on Amazon. So let me tell you guys how this all works. So here's the card, the SD card. It's really hard to see. You see the SD card sitting in here, this thing? Okay, so the SD card goes in here. This is wired into this. And you have an RCA cable coming out of this going into the amp. And you have speaker wire plugged into the amp, and the end of that speaker wire goes into the speakers. That's how this works. Here, I'll show you from over here so it's better to see. See, that little blue box right there, that's where the card's plugged into. That goes into here. Hang on, let me get a little closer. It goes into here. This RCA cable is the audio. The RCA cable, originally the RCA cable was going into this, because this was the amp we were using. And this was the amp. So this is where you control the volume, the bass, the treble, all that stuff. And this is where the speaker wire goes into. You see it says right and left. Right speaker, left speaker. So that would go into that, and that would come out through this door, through that hole in the door, and run right up into the speaker. And that's how it would work. But this amp was awful. So I bought a new one. So you see the RCA cable goes in here, and the speaker is hooked up through here. Now, you have to be careful because the way this is run, normally you would use speaker wire, but we weren't using that. What we have here is basically, I think you call this a 25 XLR. I'm not sure exactly the right term for it, but it looks like the kind of wire that you would plug into an electric guitar and the other end into an amplifier. So this is what we've been using. So the one end looks like you plug it into a guitar amplifier. The other end we had to splice off and take the wires and twist them and then get them in there and screw that in. You see how the two wires are in there? That's how we're able to get the sound. But that's what we've been doing for this. So now that we got that, that's working. And that's essentially how we're getting the show working. And a couple of days ago, I came up here, fixed it, hooked it up, and it sounds perfect. It sounds beautiful, better than ever actually. And now that we got a new amp, we can control the volume. It's fantastic. So I'll show you guys where the volume switch is. It's really hard to see, but there are 3 knobs here. 1, 2, 3. And this third knob, that's the volume. So these 2 amps we're just gonna leave here for now, even though they don't work. See, I got the cords all tied up here. But that amp right there, that little one, that's what we're using to run the show as of right now, until we get stuff fixed. And I kept the box it came in, the instruction manual's in there. So yeah, so that's where we are here. So we got the audio working, which is great. So the show's turned back on. This extra speaker, I don't think we're gonna use 2 speakers. I don't think we need 2 speakers because you can hear everything perfectly fine out of this one, and it's coming out of a left and right. Actually, no, I think it's both right, isn't it? Yeah, it's both right. So the left would be coming into this one. But the only reason there's 2 speakers up here is because when I was messing around with the old amp that wasn't working, I didn't know if it was an amp issue, a wire issue, or a speaker issue. So I went into one of the closets we have in the pier, and I got an extra speaker to see, because I thought maybe this speaker was broken, and I plugged it into here, but it was the same issue. But the thing is, when that amp's not working, the music is so low. You have to put your ear, like your ear has to be touching the speaker in order to hear it. That's how low it is. So you need an amp to turn the volume up in order for people to hear it, especially with, you know, all these rides going on in the background, and kids are screaming because they're having fun. You know, it's hard to hear. But even when we're closed and there's nobody here, it's still hard to hear. Just standing here, you know, you would still have to put your ear close to that speaker in order to hear it. But everything's working. We're all good. So, yeah, so that's where we are right now with the audio. So this was kind of unexpected, but we got it fixed. It took time. It was a little embarrassing. We had to keep the show unplugged. I'll show you something, by the way. Let me show you a couple other things here. I'll show you what each cable is for. This is for the dollar box. Now, some people might be wondering, this is the reset button. I push this button, everybody starts moving. In fact, they will start moving because the air compressor's turned on. But the way this is controlled is, if you look, it's also wired in to the dollar box. That's what gets the show to go off. So you can push this button and it'll go, but even if you put the dollar box in, or a dollar in the dollar box, that's what sets it off, because we have it plugged in here. This controls, this gray wire actually right here, this controls the SD card, the device that has the SD card in it, which is the program and the music and all that. Yeah, and I literally had to unplug this. And there's one more thing I should let you guys know. When you guys, you know, when I'm messing around with these guys, if you ever unplug the ribbon cables, see it says Panda, that's Rocky. Rocky's plugged into here. This one is Dalmatian. Okay, so that's Hank. Hank's plugged into there. By the way, I didn't label these. These were already here. If you ever take these things out, make sure everything is unplugged. Everything has to be unplugged, because if you unplug this ribbon cable while the show is moving on, or while it's plugged in, vice versa with this, and then you plug it back in while the show is plugged in, or worse, while the show is going on, you plug this back in, no movement, nothing. Got to get a brand new ribbon cable because you just shorted it out. Don't ask me how, I don't know why, but that's happened before. It happened back in 2014 when we were bringing back the 90s the first time. We had to get all new ribbon cable for, I think, for Tony, for Henrietta, for Bubba. I mean, like, half the characters were practically dead, okay? Like, it was bad. So that's a little thing I picked up. So anytime I come back here and work on stuff, I make sure everything's unplugged. Now, the easy thing is you just turn that little red light off, and then it just shuts the whole thing off. Or I could unplug the yellow extension cord that we have it plugged into. So yeah, so that's where we are. So I'm going to close this back up. Got to be careful of the ribbon cable. Yeah, so I'm going to... Okay, here we go. And I will lock this up later. But yeah. So that's where we are. We got a new amp. Got everything working here. And yeah, so that's where we are. So that's some of the audio behind the scenes, and I will see you guys in the next vlog. Take care.